Thank you. Well, good morning. Gosh, what an honor to be back here at McLeese & Associates FY 2023 Defense Forum. We appreciate everybody's participation. You know, this is really one of those transformational times. We see what's happening in Russia. You heard Mr. Turner speak about that. We see what's unfolding in Russia and Ukraine, informing what we have ahead as far as our challenges, specifically as it relates to China. We all know Xi Jinping is watching very intently, as well as other folks around the world that don't have the United States' best intentions in mind. And that means this, folks, that we have to be prepared. And we know that the situation there in Europe is one thing, but the other situation that we face, I believe the bigger situation, is what we face in the Indo-Pacific. And it was great to hear the CNO the other day come out with a 500 shipbuilding plan, sort of an aspirational plan. The question always is, well, what's the makeup of that plan? How many manned ships? He was talking roughly about 340 or 360 and then 140 unmanned platforms. The question from there then becomes, well, what's the composition then of the fleet? How many submarines? You know, what are we going to do with the next generation of submarines? How do you integrate unmanned platforms there? All those questions yet to be answered, ones that Congress is going to play a very significant role in answering what the composition of the fleet is going to be. How do we make sure that we modernize? We know that we have significant advantages under the sea. I think the submarine programs are incredibly important. I think we need to get to producing 3 attack submarines per year. I think it's incredibly important also that we continue on the track of success with Columbia. Columbia had some hiccups early on, but to the Navy's credit, to the shipbuilders' credit, both HII and Electric Boat, we're on track. That will be the most complex ship ever built. It's incredibly important for our nuclear triad. Those things, I think, are what we need to focus on. I also look at what we need in other parts of the fleet. If you look at the Future Defense Plan for 2030 that the Commandant put out recently, I think that truly informs what the Marine Corps needs to have, and they need a very robust complement of amphibious ships, not just connectors, not just light amphibious warfare vessels, but also the larger vessels, the large deck amphibs, the LPDs. All those things I think are incredibly important to make sure we have what we need, because the Navy Marine Corps team is going to be at the tip of the spear, and having the right complement of ships there that coincide with what the needs of the nation are, not just today, but where we need to be 10 years, 15, 20 years from now, I think is incredibly important. And if we aren't careful, sometimes you can get bogged down in what you think the needs are today instead of trying to be forward-looking. And I want to make sure that we're forward-looking in what happens, and especially as we integrate unmanned systems. Listen, unmanned systems are going to be an incredibly important part of the force going forward. The key is, though, how do we make sure we get it right? How do we make sure we exercise what works best in the fleet early on and not be afraid to fail? You know, put some of those platforms out there. Let's not do massive building of those platforms and then say, gosh, we got it wrong. We're going to tie a bunch of these other ones up. Now we got to start again and manufacture a bunch of others. Let's do some things simultaneously to figure out what's the right complement of unmanned in this future fleet. Let's make sure that we have the components necessary to have forcible entry opportunities and capability within the Marine Corps. You look at, I believe, the overall strategy, and 2 things stick out to me that really need to be addressed. Last year's 30-year shipbuilding plan was not a 30-year shipbuilding plan. It was really a short-term look, I would argue maybe just a year or 2 into the future, and lacked detail from there. We're looking forward to get another 30-year shipbuilding plan this year. I hope it's not a plan that comes out and says, well, here are the range of ships that we need. You know, those fill-in-the-box checks that sometimes we get as members of Congress, and the point is for us to fill those boxes in is not the way this should go. It shouldn't be a range of ships. It should be, these are the number of ships that we need. This is what the plan is. Be as definitive as possible. That's, I think, is incredibly important. The National Defense Strategy, too, needs to have the right amount of detail so that Congress can look at it, critique it, but then use that as the basis going forward to make sure that we make the right decisions in this upcoming NDAA. We are indeed in that transformational time. Making sure that we get it right is key. Making sure that we do that at the speed of reality is also a need. We understand that many times things happen slowly. What we have to be able to do too is make sure that not just the United States, but our allies are part of that. And I think it's incredibly important to make sure that our allies are understanding what we're doing and the things that they're doing coincide with the things that we do. You know, I'm excited about the AUKUS agreement. I'm excited about that opportunity. The AUKUS agreement, as it relates to building ships or building submarines, is great, but the more important part of that AUKUS agreement is what we do with all the other areas, with what we do in cyber, with what we do in design, with what we do in the operational level, because those things, I believe, are incredibly important for this nation going forward if we're going to make sure that we have the right deterrent effect on China. Because make no mistake about it, folks, we will not be able to do it all by ourselves. Those forces out there are such that we have to have very strong relationships with others, and they have to be not only economic relationships, but they have to be strategic relationships. And we have to be able to exercise those in an operational way. It's great to have a written agreement and said, oh, by the way, if something goes on, we're gonna jointly operate with another force. But unless we exercise that, we will not have the capability to be a credible threat to our adversaries. And I want to make sure, too, that as we exercise that and we formalize those agreements, too, that we do it in a way that creates proficiency in the force, but doesn't disclose all of the aspects of what makes our force the best on the face of the earth, and that is how we operate. And I was very encouraged this year as the Navy is beginning down the path of large-scale joint exercises to do a combined live and virtual exercise. So the Chinese don't get to see everything that we do, and it was pretty neat. I was able to go out there for the first day of the new Secretary of the Navy, his first day on the job. We went to the combined live virtual exercise, and it was pretty amazing to go on board a ship there and be able to know that there were a handful of ships that were actually at sea, but when you went to that combat control center in that ship and you looked at the board there, it was full-scale operations that were occurring there. So it's pretty amazing what we can do, and that's another great thing. That's another thing that we can do to further complicate the risk calculus for our adversaries. I argue this, the things that we need to do and need to be most important is we need to make sure that we increase the complexity of the risk calculus for our adversaries, specifically China, and raise the level of uncertainty. Chinese hate uncertainty. If you look at the things that really have boggled them, look at the response that they put out after the AUKUS agreement was put out there. They do not like those sorts of things. Anytime that we do things jointly with others, they don't like that because they know the power of what we can do. So I think those are the challenges that we have in front of us. I am confident that we can meet those challenges. You know, I hate to see what's going on in Ukraine for the Ukrainian people, for what happens there in Europe, but I do believe it's been a centering moment for lots of folks across this nation to say that this sort of conflict is a reality. It's something that we have to deal with, and there's no good news from this, but there is a side of this that at least puts everybody in a very focused position to say these are the things that we have to do, and if we're not careful, we can see that unfolding in other areas of the world, specifically as it relates to China and Taiwan. So, folks, with that, let me open it up for your questions, thoughts, ideas, and concerns, and I'll do my best to answer your questions.
Congressman, while I'm walking back here for the question, would you make a comment or two about the appropriations omnibus bill on the SCN account, specifically the question over funding for amphibs?
Absolutely. Well, the good news is the SCN account this year has been plussed up. You remember the president's budget came over building 8 ships, retiring 15. I tell folks, I'm not a mathematician, but I know this, you can't do addition by subtraction. So we were able to go from 8 ships to 13 ships. We were able to cancel some of the retirements of the CGs, which we think still have some life left in them. So we're now at building 13 ships and retiring 12, so we're at a +1 status this year. On the amphib side, we still are not doing enough to build amphibs. We had an agreement at OSD Cape that would have been a multi-ship procurement, one large deck amphib, 2 or 3 LPDs, and that agreement was not signed. We could save over $1 billion if we buy those ships in mass, as we should. The problem is now we have a delay in that. We're going to be pushing that this year. You know, there's going to be some disagreement. The Commandant is pretty adamant to say 31 ships is the floor for the Marine Corps. The CNO's got a different number. And again, one of these things that I hate, which is a range of numbers. I don't like things in ranges. But the Navy's coming out and saying, no, we need less than that. And the same with OSD. So they're talking about ships anywhere from 26 to 28 to upwards of 29 amphibs. And I just don't think that that's where we need to be. And if you look at the A sub O, the operational availability of those ships, which for the Marine Corps, unfortunately, is lower than the rest of the Navy, you know, you have to have 31 ships in order to be able to put, you know, 23, 24 ships to sea. So that's another number that's part of this. Doug?
Congressman, good morning, and thanks for your time and also for your support for all the services. Sad that Virginia 1 is moving a little farther south, but
yeah,
you're still going to be on armed services. I'd take it up a level. I've done a little bit of strategic planning in my life as a soldier for life, and get your thoughts on what I would term almost drift. It seems that from a national security perspective, we're a step or two behind our 2 existential adversaries. Mm-hmm. We have no budget in 22. We have no PB for 23 yet. We have no national security strategy. We have no national defense strategy or a national military strategy. In the case of the Army, we have a climate strategy. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on how we need to approach what many now say is Cold War II, where we have 2 nuclear power peer competitors that we have to deter? Thank you, sir.
Well, listen, there's no understating the challenge in front of us. We see what's happening with Russia. And listen, I hope we don't get lulled into a false sense of complacency, as Mr. Turner said, in saying, hey, we're watching how the Russians are operating, not what we thought that they could do. But again, just the pure mass of that military still makes it a significant issue. Got to remember other Russian assets too, under the sea assets, still pretty capable. And the same with the Chinese. We live in a challenging and dangerous world, and those adversaries do not have our best intentions in mind. The way that we most effectively deter those adversaries in the future is to make sure that we build the necessary capacity within our defense structure to be able to counter them. Make sure that we are innovative and creative, willing to take some risks. So that's what it's going to take, because our adversaries are willing to do that. Make sure we push the envelope on things. Make sure, too, that we have formalized agreement with friends and allies around the world. And what we're seeing in the Indo-Pacific is a lot friendlier perspective for many of folks there that will be our friends than we've seen in the past, because they see the behavior by China. It's one thing to have a nice friendly relationship and pat each other on the back and say, gosh, you're great, you're a great friend, and if anything goes wrong, we're all going to do this together. That sounds great. But we all know that when things go crazy, when chaos sets in, if the Chinese make a play on Taiwan, we know then that's when the rubber hits the road, and we have to be able to operate in that environment. It's going to be a highly contested environment. It's going to be chaotic. The key is when we have those friends, we better make sure that those friends have worked with us so we know these scenarios, so we know when that happens, that those friends bring capacity and capability with them that help us have the tactical and strategic overmatch that we need, because words don't make success on the battlefield. It's exercising that and making sure that we do that. So I want to make sure that we get to that particular point. That's why these agreements like the AUKUS agreement and others that are in the offing with those allies there are going to be critically important, and make sure that we strenuously exercise those capabilities to make sure when the chaos breaks out, we are operational and we are efficient in what we're doing.
We have one more minute for one more question. Sir, you're a quick talker.
I'll get it done quick. Yes.
Yes, sir. Don't worry.
Yep.
There's always
time for Wittman.
That's
Congressman, it's Harry Kelso again.
yes.
One question I had about considering the strategic nature of the logistical issues in the Pacific. One of the concerns I have has to do with the supply of sufficient petroleum, et cetera,
Yes.
in the Indo-Pacific. One of the big issues that has arisen has been the issue about the Red Hill, energy facility, the tank farm. And I was just wondering if the Congress has taken a hard look at that to see if we can help the Navy and the DLA with that.
Yes, we're taking a very, very hard look at that. I have deep reservations about what we heard rolled out the other day about closing Red Hill. Let me tell you, we better be doggone confident that we have fuel in other places around the Pacific Rim to make sure we have it. The good news is this, is we have that capability. Think about it. Anchorage, Alaska is closer to Hingham Island than Pearl Harbor is. So we want to make sure we're doing that and think about what we have as opportunities there in Alaska. So we need to think about this, but I want to make sure that before we close down a single quart of capacity at Red Hill, we have that capacity operational elsewhere to make sure that we have that sustainability, because that's going to be the key in any sort of conflict. We can do that, but we got to make sure that the transition is done the right way. Very good.
Sir.
Thanks so much. Thank you.